So when I say new findings in climate change, obviously I jump around topics because it just depends on the best new exciting result that I come across. Obviously, it's not that I'm scanning the entire horizon to find the most exciting paper or report. It's just whatever comes across or whatever I come across, I pick things that I find are exciting. This is about ocean fronts as decadal thermostats modulating continental warming hiatus. Okay, thermostat, of course, is something that controls the temperatures like the AC or the refrigerator. So what do we mean? I'm going to be brief, but you can go and read the paper. Of course, I'm thinking about this because there are very different warming rates on the different continents. And when we say hiatus, usually it means it's warming everywhere, but in some places the warming is not happening. So when we say continental warming hiatus, we just mean that some places are not warming as fast or not warming at all, or maybe some are cooling as well. So I'm showing this trend plot for 1901 to 2023 and 1994 to 2023, which emphasizes that there are some places which are warming fast, even in the long term, but especially in the short term. Polar amplification is something that is always getting attention, but also the drier regions of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and there are regions of large continents that are non-uniform in warming, right? So what is the relation? Over the past decade, an unexpected cooling trend has been observed in East Asia and North America during winter. So East Asia, somewhere here, and North America. So they are usually referred to as warming holes, but mostly we leave that for this here. Okay, so this region of the North Atlantic Deepwater Formation has been remarkably slow in warming or even cooling, and we still debate about whether it's the AMOC, which would be in effect coming from here. If you don't know what that is, don't worry about it. But if you are curious, I have podcasts elsewhere, or whether this is coming from taking heat out to the north of the Deepwater Formation site here. So that's a nice different topic that we will not get into here. Climate model simulations suggest that this pattern is of stalled warming. Besides, accelerated warming will repeat throughout the course of global warming, influenced by the natural decade-long variations in the climate system. However, understanding the exact factors affecting the pace of warming remains a challenge. Here we show that a pause in warming over continental areas, namely local warming hiatus, can be accompanied by excessive heat accumulation north of the ocean fronts. So ocean fronts are basically sharp temperature gradients, and this topic is important where when you look at the air-sea interactions in colder temperatures, typically warm temperatures in the tropics can drive convection dynamic ascent. So air near the warm temperatures gets warm, evaporation is high because it's very warm, and warm moist air rises, expands, cools, clouds, rain. So IPCZ, West Pacific Warm Pool, and so on are the hotspots where such dynamic ascent happens. But in cold mid-latitudes, it's always been a debate about whether atmosphere cares about cold temperatures, but it's now clear that when there are fronts, the atmosphere does see the front, and there are mechanisms to explain, through sea level pressure response, vertical entrainment of momentum, and so on and so forth. Okay, so here we show that, sorry, did I miss something? Natural decadal variations in the climate system. However, understanding the exact factors affecting the pace of warming remains a challenge. Here we show that a pause in warming over continental areas, namely local warming hiatus, can be accompanied by excessive heat accumulation north of the ocean fronts. This oceanic condition, often manifesting in the form of marine heat waves, constrains the subseasonal growth of atmospheric planetary waves, significantly increasing the likelihood of cold extremes in downstream continents, so west to east. Okay, I'm talking in the middle of the abstract, so I keep getting lost in terms of the um, so cold extremes in downstream continents. Our results underscore the importance of closely monitoring changing oceanic fronts in response to human-induced warming, which can potentially reshape the inherent decade-long fluctuations within regional climates over the long term. This is very important because many places, just now a nice paper came out about the low frequency intrinsic variability in the Indonesian Australian monsoon, for example. And similarly, there are decadal variabilities naturally occurring in the system. Often we confound them with trends, and maybe there are these processes involved as well in modulating them. So it's a tricky problem. Even July, so let's read a little bit further and stumbling over here. In July 2023, the global mean temperature reached an unprecedented high, coinciding with record-breaking heat waves and widespread wildfires that swept across the globe. Historical data illustrates a significant increase in the frequency, duration, and intensity of heat waves over recent decades, aligning with the accelerated upward trajectory of global mean temperatures. In contrast, amidst this warming trend, winter temperatures remain unexpectedly cold compared to the warming pathways projected in climate models. Climate models have lots of issues, but we still have to rely on them to see where we might be going in the future. This persistence of cold extremes has led to a debate about whether wider winter temperature fluctuations are inherent to global warming, directing scientific attention to the rapid decline in Arctic sea ice. So the whole debate about whether Arctic sea ice decline and Arctic warming is increasing the meandering of the jet stream and whether that's doing something, uh, you know, to lower latitudes all the way into the monsoon domain and so on. Understanding the cause of recent winter cold extremes remains an open question, and the contentious debate surrounding the influence of diminished sea ice coverage persists. Reduced sea ice amplifies heat transfer from the exposed ocean to the atmosphere, causing anomalous warming in the Arctic. However, climate models only partially replicate the observed continental cooling in mid-latitudes. This disparity between observations and models has propelled research focus into the internal variability within the climate system pertinent to decadal variations in winter climate. So the focus is on winter, but I suspect this will work also in other seasons because the process is still the same in terms of fronts and waves and their propagation down to downstream continents. So climate models only partially replicate this continental cooling, which you have to be careful about. A potential key to unraveling the issue of recurrent cold extremes may lie in the intrinsic nature of winter climates conducive to the growth of planetary waves, i.e., a chain of continental scale cyclones and anticyclones. So extratropical storm tracks are very active in the winter. Equator to pole temperature gradient is very strong, and the eddies that are trying to do the heat transport, beyond a certain latitude, ocean isn't doing much. The Periclinic instabilities in the atmosphere create eddies that do all the transport. So that planetary wave generation in the winter is very strong as cyclones and anticyclones. Stronger land sea thermal contrast accelerated jet streams that impact orography. So where there are mountains, you have, you know, rocky waves being generated as well. An abundant potential energy residing in the steepened north-south mean temperature gradient all fuel growth of planetary waves. I mentioned the temperature gradient always, and these concomitantly bring intense cold or warm advections across the mid-latitudes. The complex interplay of internal climate system factors that modulates the preferred planetary wave responses can lead to divergent decadal trends in regional winter temperatures. So we're talking about seasonal warming trends, but still it's critical for the annual warming trend. So typically when we show these, we are always talking about year-to-year change. Here it's showing degree Fahrenheit per decade for these decades, but it's still to be, it's still important, sorry, to think about trends not only annual, but decadal, but also seasonal. Where was I? This, da, 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 constantly, yeah. So, uh, the complex interplay of internal climate system factors that modulate the preferred planetary wave responses can lead to divergent decadal trends in regional winter temperatures, subsequently altering the likelihood of cold events for a given decade. So, decadal modulation, decadal variability being modulated by these global warming responses in terms of oceanic fronts and wave generation. In this sense, an in-depth understanding of the internal climate variability that shapes the behavior of planetary waves can provide valuable insights into the future outlook of regional climate. Such processes obviously are not well captured in the models, could be issue of resolution and of course many others. If you do something wrong with the El Nino in the tropics, how does it affect equator to pole temperature gradient and the barometric instabilities and the waves? And of course the resolutions are not good enough to capture the fronts very well and so on. So recurrent local hiatus in global warming, jumping ahead, I'm being brief. Read the paper if you are interested in the full details. Regional surface air temperatures respond to global warming depending on geographical location and topographic conditions. This is especially the case during winter, as can be seen in figure 1, which we'll look at in a minute. Conspicuous cooling trends are found in East Asia and North America, contrasting with steeper warming trends in Europe and the Arctic, particularly in recent decades, which is in the supplementary that you can look up. Ocean fronts as a decadal thermostat, jumping ahead again. Now we examine the process that could drive regional winter temperatures anomalously low over a decade. So how can you produce colder uh, temperature anomalies in winter for a decadal, at decadal time scales? Here the term anomalous in model simulations denotes a deviation from the average of all ensemble experiments at a given time, such that we can define an anomalously cold period irrespective of global warming trend. So essentially, if winter has high variabilities, which does, then extracting trends out of that is tricky, plus separating the natural variability from trend is tricky. So people do ensembling, large ensembles and all these good things to estimate the internal variability so you can separate the signal, which we call the forced variability or forced trend from anthropogenic activities mostly, and natural variability, right? We composited all hiatus events detected in the ramp-up experiments to determine their time evolution from the early beginning till the mature phase. As a hiatus period tends to be preceded by an overwhelming period, we separately compare the antecedent warm and ensuing cold periods, setting an onset year as lag 0, i.e. the years marked by upside down triangles in figure 2a, which we'll look at. A decade from lag -4 to lag plus 5 years is assigned to the warm to the overwarm period and following 10 years, so lag of +6 to +15 years to the mature hiatus period. So basically, models runs are done to capture this behavior of warming hiatus, which means there is a slowdown or colder winters. When you do annual mean, colder winters obviously are going to show up as damped warming in the annual or decadal, or uh, less warming compared to global warming. That's the main point. So let's just look at a few figures and read a few main points. I'm running long in this podcast, I know, but let's do it anyways. So DJF for 1995 to 2021. Remember, this is focused on the winters. So here is the lack of warming or colder than normal winters, and here is one as well, East Asia and North America. So observed temperature trends during winters of 1995-96 to 21-22. So East Asia, you can see global warming has a nice upward trend with a global interannual to global variability. So interannual variability is clear, and then you run a decadal mean, running mean, and so uh, that's the so beginning of the hiatus. So you can see a colder winter decade here, and this is over North America, similar behavior. And you have decadal temperature changes in a ramp up and occurrence of local warming hiatuses. So you have these arrows which show that there have been decades since 2010 to future projections out to something like 2040 here. Sorry, 2100 to 2140. We're going into La La Land into the future, but you know my complaints about projections. In the beginning, you are dominated in the projections by the internal variability, and then scenarios begin to dominate. So by the time we get to 2100 and beyond, scenarios are telling you something that is completely dependent on how the scenarios are designed. So global mean temperatures here, it's not anomaly, it's temperature. So we have the over the I copied the figure, but it's hardly readable. So this is the continental, and this is the global mean. So this is, sorry, East Asia, and so there are two colors, uh, North America and East Asia, and in the bars here we are looking at uh, so let's just read the caption here. So you can see here ensemble experiment number and year. The spread seems quite large, but decadal temperature changes in ramp up and occurrence of local warming hiatuses. An 11-year running mean time series of winter temperatures over North America in red and East Asia in blue in ramp up experiments. You go and read how this is done. Bright colored lines represent each individual ensemble simulation in which, so you have the bands there, in which the ninth is highlighted in darker colors. Dotted lines denote the ensemble average, so you can see the dotted line almost as a trend there. And upside down triangles denote the onset of a local warming hiatus, so they capture a number of warming hiatus events in model experiments. Bars depict the annual mean GMT, ninth ensemble member result, global mean temperature, highlighted by darker color when warmer than the ensemble averages. So you have darker bands within that. In B, we have filled boxes denoting periods when regional temperatures show a steep negative trend within a running window. So vertical axis represents 28 ensemble experiments. So in each decade, you can think of that way going into the future, you have these warming hiatuses. So obviously, here again, you're looking at atmosphere and ocean conditions during the overwarm mature hiatus decades in East Asia. The message is still the same. They are describing fronts to do ramp up and ramp down experiments. So assess the anomaly imposed and then wave activities tracked, and then they are compared to observations. So this model experiment and the focus from observations of the historic period as well is dependent on oceanic fronts and downstream responses in waves, which is well-known process, and emphasis is on the storm track. This is where the storm tracks tend to be, and there are two hotspots because one is downstream of the Asian continent over here. The other one is downstream of the North American continent over here. So we are looking at differences in East Asia and North America versus Europe. Okay, so I'm skipping reading the details of the caption, obviously. And here reference month in ramp up and the warm Kuroshio experiment. So many perturbation or sensitivity studies are done to show how the warming on the front can be ramped up. And they talk about the blob that is observed here as well, which appears on intraannual timescales and sometimes persists for longer, some actually seasonal timescales and then persists for intraannual timescales. So this is from 2013 to 14 VJF in observation. So that is the so-called blob that Nick Bond started discussing a lot of ecological impacts and so on and so forth. And there is a response in the you know, uh, marine heat waves and northeastern Pacific SST. So again, wave activity related to oceanic fronts. The final figure here is decadal variability change in ramp up and PI experiments and the SST trend. So you can see how the influence of anthropogenic forcing on local warming hiatus is inferred. Relative change in decadal variability of surface air temperature over land in red blue shades, uh, variance ratio of 11-year running mean winter temperatures in ramp-up experiments and pre-industrial PI control simulations. So CO2 is fixed to 280 ppm or so for pre-industrial simulations, and then anthropogenic forcings are provided for the other simulations to compare the two. Values greater than 1 indicate increased decadal variability, and smaller values indicate decreased variability under anthropogenic warming. So pre-industrial and ramp-up experiments, you can see that the hiatus occurrences go out per century, and obviously that's significant. That's why they're talking about. And this is for East Asia, and this is for North America. In the pre-industrial, actually hiatus occurrence was higher, and ramp-up experiment here shows a smaller number. So East Asia and North America in the ramp-up and pre-industrial evolutions. Um, why? Because you can read here, marine footprint of local warming hiatus. So warming hiatus accompanied with the oceanic change is a decadal phenomenon, but as illustrated in figure 4a, monthly fields frequently exhibit concurrent temperature patterns, i.e. anomalous warming in the northern flank of the Kuroshio extension alongside freezing temperatures in North America. To investigate the downstream influence of oceanic changes along Kuroshio extension, a set of warm Kuroshio experiment was conducted similar to the warm Gulf Stream experiment. In this experiment, the reference SST depicted in 4a was applied to the western North Pacific region to focus on the influence of the ocean front. Despite the restricted regional forcing, the average atmospheric response reveals a planetary wave pattern similar to that shown. So basically, they are able to impose the SST trends and patterns, and obviously the differences in Asia and North America here is implied by, you are talking about Kuroshio extension and the anthropogenic signal here, but you also have the blob here, which is different than what's happening in the Gulf Stream experiments. So the two responses are different. Please go and read the details. I'm already here at about 23 minutes, but I will conclude this with by reading the implications for future change. The role of ocean front as a modulator of decadal climate raises questions regarding the predictability of ocean front variability and its response to global warming. Although the observed features in the North Atlantic and North Pacific basins appear similar, the underlying process driving decadal changes differ. The thermal gradient structure and intensity near the Gulf Stream are strongly influenced by the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation. So we have that warming hole there or cooling patch in the North Atlantic, whose local surface branch continues the Gulf Stream. In the North Pacific, remote influences from the tropical Pacific, such as the impact of ENSO transmitted through planetary wave propagation, play a significant role. However, in addition to these basin scale circulations, a multitude of processes operating across various time scales contribute to shaping decadal variability. These include oceanic waves affecting mid-latitude gyro-circulation, multi-year persistence in the ocean mix layer, and heat exchange with the atmospheric disturbances. As a result, the observed decadal cooling in the two continental regions can be largely attributed to the combined effects of internal climate system factors that become integrated into the memory of the mid-latitude ocean mixed layer. Obviously, when you're talking about low frequency variabilities, the only place where memory can come from is the ocean. Of course, there are slow changing variabilities in glaciers as well, but We are talking about atmospheric response, which obviously depends on Arctic ice and glacier melt as well. But here we are focused on the waves generated by the ocean, and in that sense, the internal variability. As the decadal variability in ocean fronts exhibits inherent red noise aspects, it imposes limitations on predicting mid-latitude winter climates on a decadal timescale. So a lot of technical terms there, what the spectral signals are in terms of, you know, red noise aspects basically means there are lower frequency signals in internal variability in the ocean fronts. Obviously, if you have a lot of baroclinic instability and eddies forcing the ocean from the atmosphere, you expect the ocean to integrate it and produce a low frequency signal as well. Nonetheless, it's worth noting that climate models generally simulate smoother oceanic frontal gradients. You can see that in the supplementary figure, and weaker decadal variability compared to observations. This discrepancy in climate model representation leads to a reduced level of atmospheric ocean coupling over ocean frontal regions compared to what is observed in reality, presumably contributing to a significant underestimation of the internal decadal variability of the atmospheric circulations. So we're talking about the atmosphere having decadal signatures in terms of colder winters for a decade or warmer winters. That memory is produced in the ocean fronts uh, and wave generation. So waves are transmitted by the atmosphere to produce colder winters on a low frequency. The memory is coming from the coupled system. Okay, this discrepancy, of course, leads to frontal the reduced level of atmospheric oceanic coupling over frontal regions compared to what is observed in reality, presumably contributing a significant underestimation of the internal decadal variability of atmospheric circulation. Given this context, local warming pauses, which inherently reflect decadal variability within the climate system, may be more frequent in the real world than projected in warming scenarios. Improving our understanding of the climatic influence of ocean fronts holds the key to gaining valuable insights into regional climate change. This is really key because there are 2 points. There are low frequency internal variabilities that models may be underestimating, which means the future projections have to worry about this. Plus, it's the regional climate that you really want to worry about under global warming, because global temperatures are nice to track certain things like global sea level rise as well, but nobody lives in the global mean temperature, right? So what is regional and what is local is what matters. So this is almost 20, 30 minutes. So uh, I have some comments along the way. So hopefully it's useful, but go and read the paper. Very nice references as well of the processes, the details that I